Hey guys, it's been a while since I've done any real Sorc specific content, so I wanted to go over the crystal setups for varying pieces of armor that you currently have or different stages of gearing that a lot of people are in. Now I do want to also note that this is relevant for other classes, the only difference being is whether you're a cast speed or you're an attack speed class. At the moment, in terms of crystals, we are pretty limited. We don't have the abundance of various crystals that we're going to have later on, and we also don't have the multitude of food buffs we're going to have later on. So all of these crystal builds are going to assume that you're rotating Serendia and Medaya meals. These are both going to give you one cast or attack speed, and it's going to give you one critical rating. Because of these two food buffs, we're not going to need to go all the way up to +5 from our armor. If you do want to go to +5, you can do that. It's going to save you from rotating food buffs. However, you will miss out on some of the extras from the crystals. What we're going to do first off though is we're going to go ahead and have a look at sort of your average player that managed to get a Yuria upgraded and is using that still. So we're going to look at a setup with Yuria which limits us to one crystal in the weapon. We're going to use Helric Talisman in all of these setups just as an example. For most people you're going to need this in PvP, especially for the accuracy. And then we're going to use just full 4-piece Grunel. Now if you're not using 2 socket pieces of armor, you are going to miss out quite considerably. However, you'll have to rebalance the crystals around the pieces of gear that you have. So going into this, we're going to have a look at what stats we have and what crystals we're picking up for each individual piece. So keep in mind that looking on the right hand side of the screen over here, this build is going to give you +4 to crit, +4 to cast speed, and you're going to get +2 on your movement speed as well. So overall we've hit the target. Once we give the food buffs and the meals in, we're going to hit 5 on both of these two, and that's going to be exactly where we need to be. So we're going to start off with the Helm. Now in the Helm we're running the Ancient Magical Crystal of Halfia, and we're running an Infinity Memory Crystal. So the memory itself is relatively cheap and it's going to give us 2 cast speed. We then have HP max of 50 and recovery HP of 5 from the Halfia Crystal. That's just going to round out. And you're going to see that this crystal is pretty much the go-to for helmets. The only other option really as a sorceress at least is to run the 20 evasion in Helm. Now running 2 of these once you get to higher gear levels is definitely an option, especially when you consider the fact that if the sorceress class gets caught in PvP, especially in group PvP, no amount of extra health is going to help you. And that +50 really isn't a huge amount. So if you do manage to get hold of some of the evasion crystals, I would definitely say they're a better use of your slot than this is. Next we're going to move on to the chest piece, and the chest piece is pretty much going to remain the same all the time. We're always going to be running these Cobalinas crystals, and we're going to run 2 of them. This just gives you a little bit extra carry weight, and it gives you 200 max HP overall, so considerably more HP than from the helmet sockets. The other option with this one, again, is if you want to go with special attack avoidance of 10%, you can use 2 of those and you can get 20% damage reduction on special attacks. These special attacks are your down attacks, your back attacks. So that's going to massively reduce the damage that you're taking when you're on the ground or when you're CC'd in PvP. It is a personal preference. At this moment in time, I do feel that the 200 HP and the carry weight is just more beneficial for most people. It's going to help with the grinding and you're not really min-maxing based off your boss armors at all. So keep that in mind. If you do manage to get full boss armor set much further down the line, then these crystal setups are going to become a little bit more redundant, less relevant for where you are. The next piece that we're going to look at are the gloves. So the gloves we're going to pick up +2 crit and we're going to pick up accuracy. So we're going to pick up precision that gives us +8 accuracy. The reason being is there's not much more that you can get in gloves that's really worth having, especially not when you're balancing your stats. And accuracy is always going to be a huge thing, especially if you're grinding mobs at a higher level than you or if you're PvPing. At the end of the day, you do no damage if you miss. Having more accuracy is always going to be beneficial until we get to the higher echelons of AP brackets, where accuracy becomes a lot less relevant. And obviously the critical hit that we're getting from the Valor Crystal, we're going to need that to push us up to the +4. Over to the boots. Again, this is something that's not really going to change. You're pretty much always going to run the History of Crystals. You want the extra movement speed. Getting 2 movement speed from your boots is great. And again, weight limit. Weight limit's something that a lot of people are going to have to buy from the Pearl Shop if they're looking to carry a lot more when they're grinding and have to drop weight a lot less. This becomes more apparent in the higher levels of grind spots. However, getting some carry weight from your crystals is always a good thing. And again, in terms of boots, there's not really a huge amount of variance here at the moment. Another option though is the Adamantite. Now the Adamantites are going to give you some knockdown resist. So using the Adamantites in your shoes is definitely an option. However, after doing quite considerable amount of testing, having that extra 50% knockdown and bound resist didn't really seem to do that much. There's so much CC getting thrown out in PvP that the resistances themselves, although they can be game changing in 1v1, in larger scale PvP, you're just blanketed with so much CC that you really don't have much chance of resisting them. Next we'll go on to the weapon and the offhand. So the weapon itself, we're going to use an Addis crystal. The Addis crystal is going to pick us up the last one crit and the last one cast speed that we need to get to the +4s. This crystal really isn't that good value, however, when you're using a Yuria weapon and you're restricted to one socket, you've really not got that much of an option. You don't have the luxury of putting in an AP crystal at the moment, however, that will change as you move forwards. With the Helric talisman, you're always going to run the Black Spirit crystal. With any offhand, you're pretty much always going to be putting that Black Spirit crystal in there. Getting the extra AP and the extra HP for one crystal socket is incredibly high value. They do sell for quite a large amount at the moment, however you can also pick 2 of these up through just doing the quest chain. So if you have already had them and sold them, more fool you. If you haven't, now's a pretty good time to use them. The only downside to these crystals is when you do lose them in PvE grinding to mobs, you really feel the loss because of the expense. So be careful when you're using a full crystal setup that you're not just going out there and dying needlessly. Always make sure you're grinding places that you can comfortably grind. Now the last one cast speed and the last one crit we're also going to get from the fact that the amulet that I'm using in this build is the ultimate Yuria amulet. So to benefit from this, you're going to need to take your amulet to Yuria, your Yuria amulet to ultimate, and that's going to pick up the last one crit and the last one cast speed, taking you all the way up to 4. On to the next build, we're looking at Liverto. Now those that have Liverto have the luxury of the extra socket in the weapon, and also the fact that the weapon comes with +3 crit. This makes getting to +4 incredibly easy. However, it also means that you have to rebalance things. So I'll just touch on a couple of the quick things here. So the boots, the ancient magical crystal history, or the history of crystals, they remain exactly the same. The chest, the Cobalinus, again remain exactly the same. And the Helric talisman, the Black Spirit crystal. Nothing changes in those 3 pieces of gear. The changes come from the gloves. So the gloves, we're going to use precision again for the accuracy, and we're going to pick up 1 cast speed and 1 attack speed. Now obviously attack speed is irrelevant for the Sorceress class, however the cast speed +1 from the Viper crystal is going to be vital to hitting those 4, 4 and 2s. So looking at the weapon itself, in the weapon we're going to pick up an Addis crystal, and we're going to now be able to add in that power crystal, giving us 5 AP. So the Addis is going to give us the +1 crit and cast speed that we need, and that's going to help us push to 4, and then we're going to gain 5 AP by merit of having that second socket and being able to run a power crystal. Once you start running power crystals, you should also start thinking about farming the red battlefield, getting the upgraded power crystals that add +2 human damage as well. So definitely worth having a look. However, for most people, it's just not a very good use of their time to begin with. The last piece of gear that we're going to look at is the Helm, and in the Helm this time we're going to switch out for a Magic Crystal Memory, and we're going to keep the half year in there as well. So the Memory is going to give us the last 2 cast speed, and this is going to ensure that we hit that 4 before using the 2 food buffs. This setup benefits from a little bit more AP, but overall it's just a lot more flexible in what you can and can't run. Nothing much changes in 3 pieces though, so it's purely the weapon and the helm that you're looking to switch around, and some of the cheaper crystals in the gloves. The last one we're looking at then is the Kzarka build. So Kzarka has a much better item effect. Thankfully we get 3 cast speed. Cast speed being a bit of an awkward one to find in our crystals, having it from the weapon definitely helps. So we're just going to skim through this again. In the helm, 2 half-year crystals this time again, because we don't need the extra stats from any other crystals. The half-years can be replaced with the evasion if you want to, and I definitely advise it at higher gear levels. The chest piece remains Cobalinus, Nothing changing again on this unless you want to go with those special attack damage reductions. The boots will run in 2 histories. It's going to give us that 2 movement speed again. And then the Helric, we've still got the Black Spirit Crystal. Nothing's changing in that one, we're going to keep that. What changes though is the gloves and the weapon. The gloves is really straightforward. So what we can do with the gloves is we can use the cheap Valor Crystals. So the Valor Crystals give +2 to our crit rating, which means that we can hit 4 crit rating really simply just by using these 2 crystals. The beauty of doing this means that we can now use a really cheap enchantment crystal for 1 cast speed in our weapon and pick up 5 AP. This takes us to 4, 4 and 2 with crit, cast and movement speed, and we can still use a Crimson Flame Power Crystal, which is going to give us that extra 5 AP. It is worth noting that there are other ways you can do this. You can actually overkill your cast speed if you want. So if you really wanted to push and have extra AP, you could run 2 power crystals in your weapon, and instead then you could change one of your Helm, get rid of the Harpier for the extra 50 HP, and you could look at running a memory crystal. The memory crystal itself is going to take you up to 5 cast speed without food buffs, and it is going to mean that you can run 2 power crystals in your weapon, giving you that extra 5 AP. Once you've done those to the red battlefield crystals, it will give you the 5 AP, and it will also give you the extra 2 human damage. That's also an option. It does overkill your casting speed, so you wouldn't actually need to use one of your meals either. You'd only need the crit meal, and this would help out in terms of getting that little bit of extra AP from there. It really comes up to a trade-off between having 50 HP or having an extra power crystal. For me personally, I prefer to use the power crystal just because I like to have as much AP as I can physically get my hands on. But for other people that are looking for a cheaper option, not running the second power crystal and not running the risk of losing that whenever you die is definitely more of a benefit. For your average person that doesn't have a lot of silver income, that doesn't know how to make money in the game just yet, or dies a lot to PvE mobs, running an expensive crystal setup that includes these power crystals can be a little bit daunting and can cost a lot of money in the long run. Overall though, this is currently the setup that I'm running. I will be switching out to some evasion crystals in the future. I am also going to look at doing some more testing with the special damage reduction in my chest piece. I know that there's 2 different schools of thoughts on these. Also, once Valencia comes, Sylvia gets released, we have different food buffs, so I'll release another video that covers the changes in the crystal setups once I get to there. As I said as well, this does pretty much universally go across the board for most classes. Bearing in mind that these crystal setups only really change cast speed and attack speed, and that's the only difference between the 2 classes, you can get a very similar setup. What I will say though is that where we use any memory crystals in the Helm for 2 cast speed, you have to take into account that to get the attack speed you actually need to use the crystals in the gloves. This can considerably throw off the attack speed and crit ratios, so it might take a little bit more balancing to be able to do that. However, what you will find is that you pretty much only balance your stats between your weapons, gloves and Helm. They're the only 3 pieces that really change. Your boots, your chest and your offhand all remain the same. Thanks for watching the video guys. Hopefully this has been informative for you. It's helping you to get your crystal setups right, especially on the Sorceress class. As always, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button for me, give this video a thumbs up and a like, and I'll be looking to release some more PvP content over the next week.